This is the Extensionists, Conversations with Great Thinkers in Agriculture. I'm Toban Dyck.
And I'm Whetter. Hey, Toban.
Hey, Jay.
Can I read you a poem?
I'd be upset if you didn't.
This is how we're going to kick off every podcast from now on. Poetry jam. All right. You suggested I read a book called Knowing What We Know by Simon Winchester.
Just for the record, I suggested this before I even read the book, but
yeah, so I got a head start on you.
You did.
But within the prologue, and he's got, even if you just read the prologue, you learn a lot, but he's got this poem from 1934 by T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is the person who wrote Cats, or the book that inspired the musical Cats. Mm-hmm. But this isn't anything about that. It's about knowledge. And it's 18 lines. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I thought this is really interesting, and it's something to keep in mind. The endless cycle of idea and action brings knowledge of motion, but not of stillness, knowledge of speech, but not of silence, knowledge of words, and ignorance of the word. Anyway, that might have been a little biblical reference there at the end. But sometimes I think, our quest to constantly bring new ideas, constantly suggest farmers should be doing things differently or better, that's got to be somewhat exhausting. Do you think? Like when you put your farmer hat on and you think of the flood of all this information coming at you, is it overwhelming?
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think we've talked about this before, like even with, I think it was the Marla episode where we talked about this. Like it's hard to wade through that.
Yeah.
Right. And it quickly becomes a mountain. Right. And that's a problem. Like that's an element rather, maybe not a problem.
For us.
Yeah.
Because our mandate, our self-described mandate, is to extend knowledge and information to farmers. So how do we do that in a way that appreciates the huge volume of information that farmers are already being bombarded with?
I think that if we're able to ask practical questions of the people that we're interviewing, like really kind of grassroots, how do I implement this on my farm? And this is where anecdote, I think, goes a long ways. Going back to Marla, even we were chatting about saline areas or patches of land. Like I can talk about a parcel of land that I farm that has these elements, and we can talk about how to do it. And I think also the more we can acknowledge that there is a glut of information and that there is a sense of there probably is a kind of a current of being kind of a threat of being overwhelmed by it. I think that helps too. I think the people who do feel overwhelmed won't feel alone. Like it'll help them to know that that it is true. There is a lot, and like the expectation that I'm going to implement every new thing on my farm is unrealistic, and it's nice to know that there's some acknowledgement of that. I should also say this before I give you space to talk.
Love that. You're on a roll.
There is a little bit about like this especially today, this kind of quest for optimization, right? Like we do it with our bodies, our brains. Everything just has to be optimized. And maybe that's the same with extension, where the expectation is just too high. Like we're expecting farmers to just fully optimize their farms with everything that's coming at them and all the information, where it's like there needs to be a bit of space for error and a space for just living.
Right.
And
space for, I'm going to listen to the podcast or read it. And because I want to listen to a really good conversation about research and about people, I'm not going to implement anything. Or maybe I'm just making a list of 100 things that I could do, but I'm only going to do one or two of them this year.
Yeah. And I think we got to be okay with that. Like I'm guilty of it. Like I'm guilty of going down that optimization road, and just like take a step back, and chill out a bit.
Yeah. And I think reminding our listeners and people in general, I mean, there's always this get better, get help, etc., which
Yeah.
is good. I mean, if you need
course.
it, great. But that you have to keep changing and or getting better, change or die. You know, that whole
Yeah.
mentality.
Yeah.
And I just like to take some of the pressure off and just say, just have a good listen to us. And, you know, if you learn something great, if you don't, that's okay too.
Yeah, and the whole idea, and it's just the concept of like never being good enough, right? Like that whole, like, drilling it in. Well, yeah, you're an okay farmer, but you should be a lot better, right?
Yeah.
It's like you kind of all the farmers listening, like you are good enough, you are enough, right? Like
Yeah.
as you are, like right now, We're doing extension because we value it.
Farmers are still looking for information, even while governments have pulled away from the job of extension. So like you said, the need's there, and there's fewer people actually doing extension. And so we thought we'd jump into that. And we hope that sponsors recognize that the service that we're offering and give us some support.
As much as we are doing that because we see a need and we have a passion for it, we're also doing it because we see a need among some of the groups that could be sponsors, and we see that they are also looking for new ways to extend.
If anybody else wants to step forward, we'd welcome their support as well. This is the Extensionists, and our guest today is Afua Mante. Afua, can you tell us where you work and what you do?
I am an assistant professor in the Department of Soil Science at the University of Manitoba, and I run the soil physics program there.
Now we're going to get to soil physics, but I want to talk to you about your early introduction to agriculture. Do you mind telling me, so you grew up in Ghana, your mom's family were farmers.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
Yeah, so I grew up in the city. I was born and raised in the city for the first 9 years of my life. And I'll say, of course, life happened and we had to move somewhere. The first place we moved was Village 1. I'll call it Village 1. And then, of course, things didn't work out there. So my mom's brothers and my grandma were like, why don't you come back to the village, which I'll call Village 2 this time. And they were like, well, if you come, at least there'll be plenty of food and you don't have to worry about food anymore. And that sounded really nice. So we just jumped at it and we packed ourselves and we went to my mom's village. So when we went, of course, my uncles are farmers. That has been their occupation for most part. And so, of course, we were part of it. Everybody in the family is part of agriculture there. So we go to these fields and, of course, we prepare the land. And initially they didn't have tractors or plows or how it was more of a physical work. So yeah, with that, well, usually my portion of the task was to cook.
Okay.
So I would join some of the ladies in the family and we would cook for the helps and also for other family members. And I like doing that part of it because I didn't have to be the one, raking and hoeing. And so it was the best part of the farming activities. But then I realized that, okay, that is what was really feeding us and making sure that we are able to go to school and get what we needed. Right. So at one time, my uncle and I were sitting under this big tree in the field, and he had actually gotten one tiny tractor and a plow and a harrow, and it was like his life savings invested into that. And it made him so happy because we were able to get to the field and do all the field work on time because it was strictly rain-fed agriculture. So you had to really meet the rains. So if you delay because you didn't have the right labor and do things on time, then you miss the whole first rains. And it's like, yeah, you are heading towards losses. So when he got all of that, it's like we were sitting under this tree and having this discussion and just you could see the smile on his face. He was just beaming watching these equipment working and doing all the job, right? And then he said, do you know that people study this? I'm like, oh, okay. I was just watching. I was just amazed seeing how all of these things. And I was in junior high school, probably second year. Okay. So when I went to senior high school, right from grade 4, I wanted to be an engineer, and it was more of civil and electrical. But then when I went to senior high school, one of my early mentors, he had come to visit our school, and he asked me, of course, we were about to graduate, what do you want to do after graduate? I said, I want to study engineering. And he said, what kind? He said, civil or electrical. He said, what about agricultural engineering? I'm like, oh, there is a thing called agricultural engineering. And from that day, when he explained to me, I said, okay, what is it about? He said, oh, we make farming a little less difficult.
That's
Yeah.
a good way to put it.
Where did you meet this person?
Right on my campus in my senior high school.
In your high school?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he would come every vacation because the family was living in the village there. So he would come from, that's my alma mater, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. So he would come every long vacation. He was in the agricultural engineering program there. So he would come and then help my class, the science class,
And
to catch up.
was that his hometown, your school?
That was.
So he would come back home and then he would pop into the school
Exactly.
and try to recruit students into agriculture.
No, he
engineering.
was, well, actually, that was what was happening, yeah. And actually, interestingly enough, my school was Nkrumah Agricultural Senior High School.
Okay.
Because it's agricultural land, everybody is into farming there, right? So yeah, when he talked about that, I'm like, okay, that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
And I could connect that to what was happening with my uncles, and it made sense to me.
Afua, is this the same school where you got suspended for a month?
Yeah. Let's get to that.
It's the same school.
Yeah. What did you do?
Well, some of us decided to lead a demonstration to make the school better.
I love it.
Yeah. So yeah, that is the same school, really.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
you of course have to tell us what the demonstration was all about.
Yeah, you do.
Well, my uncle, when they were trying to convince us to come back to the village, that one of the reasons, there will be food. That was great. But then the other thing, we know education is not really going to be really that great because, of course, we had poor resources. Teachers were not coming. It was far removed from the city, so teachers were not coming. And so it happened that when you go to that school, and I wanted to be an engineer, so I had to choose the general science course. And you didn't have teachers, you didn't have enough resources, textbooks. So it's just, so when you get in there, your failing is really assured. It's like you fail before you start.
Right.
So it's like there is actually no hope. But then it's like, I still want to do science. And I recall my mom would say, Nana, my other name is Nana. Nana, it's not about where you are, it's about what you are. Remember whose child you are and know where you are going. So she would say this almost every day.
Wow.
Almost every day. So I knew the possibility to just fail was huge. But there was this thing at the back of my mind ringing all the time. Know who you are, know whose child you are, and know where you are going. Because my mom believed in my dream of becoming an engineer. He was the one who really emphasized that to me, that you will be an engineer. I'm like, okay. So she was always, having that voice.
Yeah.
And whenever I went to school, of course, I was one of the best students in the school.
Of course.
Of course.
I could tell by talking to you for a few minutes that there's no doubt in my mind.
Yes, you put in all that effort and trying hard to not fail. And luckily for me, in my second year, actually, there was this policy in my alma mater, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and that was facilitated by the late Kwesi Andam, Professor Kwesi Andam. He was the vice chancellor. So there was this time that they wanted to empower the rural folks, right? So they had this policy that would support any student who would at least pass all their subjects without any fail, then at least they would get admission into the university. It faced a lot of pushback, but the first year we had one student from my school who could go through that program. And then I'm like, yes, I am going to try hard not to fail. I knew I wouldn't get the best grades, but then I knew that if I put in the effort, I won't fail. So I worked so hard to not fail. And surprise, surprise, when the admission came, guess what was on it? agricultural
Oh,
engineering.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
it was to me, it was like the stars were aligned.
Yeah.
It was a gift for me. So that's how I got into agricultural engineering.
Wow.
And I don't know, probably in my class, I was the only one who saw agricultural engineering. It's like,
Yeah.
everybody was in there for like, I don't know, maybe it was a mistake. I shouldn't be here. I didn't choose it. I'm like, well, I did not have a choice, but this is what I wanted to do.
That's
So it was
amazing.
given to me,
Yeah.
but it was a gift.
But
Yeah.
I don't want to leave the protest because it's really key. I think it was you told me a bit about it on the drive over.
Yeah.
But you led all the students kind
Yeah.
of up and down the village, and it was very effective.
It was.
But you were fighting for like
Better education,
supplies
yeah,
and
good food and
Yeah.
teachers doing their job. So yeah, it was like teachers, because it's a farming community, teachers wouldn't come to class and they will be farming and even using the students on their farms.
Wow.
And so they won't come to class. So we realized that that was not helping. I mean, that was the only senior high school that was functioning in the district, the whole district of the Quell North. So it's like, okay, and I knew this is the only place I could be. I mean, we can't afford all the fancy schools that I wanted to go. We
Yeah.
couldn't afford that. So this is the only school that I knew my parents could afford. So yeah, it's mine.
yeah.
there are some stakes here. So when we decided to do that, it was to make sure that we get what we needed.
Yeah.
Already it's a less endowed school. At least the little that we had, we wanted it to be effective at least. So yeah, we got what we asked for.
So
Wow.
but you were saying before that there might be one or maybe even three students who would go on beyond high school.
Yeah.
But after you protested, then it was into the tens, and
Yeah.
then it just kept growing
Yeah.
and growing. So you look back on that as so even though you were suspended for your role in this for a month, I think it was a very pivotal moment in your life, and you
was.
helped so many other students who
Yeah.
came after you.
It was, and I look back and I'm really proud.
Yeah.
I'm really, really proud of what we did. It's like it was a very peaceful demonstration, and we made sure that each quarters did have what we were trying to do. Like we sent letters to the police, to the board, to the district assembly, to the education service, to the
Wow.
chiefs.
Wow.
It's like we wanted them to know that this is a real problem, and we were telling them, do not stop us from doing this. And we walked from the school about 3 miles to the center of the village. It was a market day too, so a lot of people were there. So yeah, it really got the attention, and we were invited over that 1 month period. We were suspended to be investigated, and yeah, it worked well. Eventually, the headmaster then was asked to leave, and they brought in a new headmaster.
Really?
Yeah, which
Wow.
just
Ay, ay, ay.
changed the life of the school. It
Yeah.
brought life back into the school. Students were
That's
eating
amazing.
well, teachers were teaching.
Yeah. Right.
And
right.
now we have that responsibility now as students to learn.
So does that legacy continue at that school
Oh
today?
yes, yes.
Is that right?
Students are doing very well. And
Wow.
before my group, the only person that I knew had really gone far was someone who had finished the school and went to different schools to make it. But then after that incident, it's like, yeah, we have students going to tertiary, several of them to the university right away.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a really strong message about kind of driving change and having kind of clarity of vision and sticking to it. So having done this once, led a peaceful demonstration and protested, do things today ever get you to that point? Or do you think about kind of, I'm not going to ask you what things, I'm just going to say in general, do you kind of think, I did this once, I could do this again?
Well, if it's possible, maybe we shouldn't, because if we had dialogue, then
Right.
that might not happen.
Right.
But then I realized that usually it takes a lot of energy, and it's like you have to, fight for something to happen. You try to sit down to have a conversation, it's like people are not hearing. So you
Yeah.
have to really get the attention,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that is what I have seen now. But then now I've tried hard to, when I need something and I think there's someone in authority who could help, I walk to their office and I ask for it.
Right.
And usually, I know you have to be respectful and kind and gracious in your ask. So when you do that, you realize that they had no idea what you were going through. So now you help people to understand, right? But when that avenue is not there, then you have to use a different avenue to get their attention.
Yeah.
But then I hope that we will be able to have those dialogues so that we don't have to waste energy walking 3 miles on the street to get what we want.
It doesn't sound like it was a waste, but I agree.
Are there soil-related things happening in Canada that are worth a protest, or at least a dialogue?
Yeah, I think.
What are they?
I realized right from high school that I've become a strong advocate for farmers because it's personal, very personal for me. And it started when I was invited to this podcast, I started reflecting on my life, and I'm like, damn, girl, you've been doing this for long. So I actually looked back and I realized when after I had talked to my mentor about that, and he had introduced me to agricultural engineering. Later on, there was this teacher in my school who, the question of what do you want to do is like a thing when you're towards the end of your high school. So I want to do agricultural engineering. That time I was very sure and certain that I want to do agricultural engineering. Then he said, really? You want to do farming? Well, why do you have to go and waste 3-4 years to do that? Maybe you should just get a piece of land here. And why do you want to waste your time? Oh, I did not talk to him again. No, the rest of the year, nope, I did not talk to him again. I felt so offended.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I have never forgotten that incident. So right from there, I'm like, okay, this is so personal to me. I've taken it so personal because food means a lot to me, right? So when I came here and I joined our cultural community, one thing that I realized is not really heard is farmers. We do not hear farmers. And they hold a lot in their hands to make us safe. One, give us food to eat. And two, they are the ones who are working our soils, right? And it's not just about the food that they produce. If you look at the ecosystem services that we talk about, like hydrologic cycling, nutrient cycling, carbon cycling, all those other stuff that happen in the environment, the soil holds that. The soil is able to do that for us. But here's the case. We have farmers who are trying to feed us. That is one. And now we throw at them all the time, soil health, soil this, soil that.
Yeah.
And now they have to go extra mile to do the extra things for the rest of the citizens.
Right.
So if one person is putting in so much effort to help the rest of us, almost 39 million people, and we do not compensate somehow or reward them somehow, that is not fair. It's like being volunteers and being overworked.
Right.
You burn out. And we hear a lot, farmers are angry, they push back and all that kind of stuff. No, if you have been doing this or you try and it's like, my input cost is going up, but then the price of my produce is like stagnant.
Yeah.
But here's the case, we are at a point where we want food security.
Yeah.
So do we increase the food prices or the produce prices? Maybe not, so that we can all afford good meal, right? But then in between where the farmer starts to grow that seed or put that seed in the soil and where that produce is out, who is taking care of the farmer to be able to make sure that that soil is healthy enough to sustain all the other ecosystem services beyond the food that we get. So it's that part that I believe is worthy of peaceful demonstration. So that we can actually bring that conversation to the table. I think it's about time Canadians ask that key question. How do we support farmers to help us to thrive?
Right.
So do you have some ideas for how to do that?
I've got lots of opinions.
Here is the place to air them. I'd love to know, because I agree with you. I think soil issues are very important, but I also think they're very complicated. You have a PhD, you are an agricultural engineer, you're obviously a very intelligent person. Me, simple farmer, scratch the simple part.
Yeah.
Me, farmer, I would love to understand soils better. And I'm guessing I'm not alone. I'm guessing a lot of farmers have a difficult time kind of wrapping their heads around the complexities of soil. And so when they get kind of information thrown at them from various angles, it's kind of hard to piece that all together into a system, into an approach. So yeah, how would you respond to that?
Well, currently we've been forced as researchers to really do knowledge sharing, which is
Right.
great. So as part of whatever proposal, that is really key component of it. You have to have a plan to make sure that is done. And that starts with our farmers, because we are this research or whatever they are, we are doing it so that we can support farmers, right? But then usually we would come up with some of these strategies and do all the research on it. And then the adoption is a problem. And it's like, who is going to adopt it and all of that dynamic. But when we start from the scratch with farmers and co-design these experiments or the research, then they're already part of the conversation.
Yeah, right.
So their inputs are already integrated into the design of the research. So it might be complex research that we may think it is, but when you start the conversation, they have that input and they know what's going on.
Yeah.
So you don't wait till you get the results and publish it or go to a conference or a meeting before you spring it up on them. They are very aware. And when we have farmers being involved right from the beginning, then there is that peer training. They start talking among themselves about the importance of what is going to happen. And when that happens, you see, one person or 2, 3, 4 people may be involved. Now we double that number exponentially, right?
Yeah.
Afua, can you give us an example of a case where this happened, where you involved farmers in the work, and like you said, 2 farmers involved, then 4, and then it just spreads? Can you think of an example?
Yeah. Actually, as our current project supported by MCA Canola and Impulses, we have the cover crop. We're trying to build soil resilience using cover crops. And when we sent that out, we had Dr. Yvonne Lawley. We had the opportunity to meet some farmers to have that discussion. And listening in, you could gather a lot of information from that conversation. And personally, it changed the approach that I was going to adopt.
Oh.
And well, so when it comes to cover crop, we have, say, cover crop. We know it's great for soil conservation, and we want to encourage farmers to adopt that, especially after they harvest. But then listening in, it's like, oh yeah, we tell, okay, it can help with nutrient cycling or something like that. So that is actually the main goal that people are adopting, so that they reduce nitrogen use, right? But then listening into the conversation, it's like, oh, maybe I didn't see that much of nitrogen input from the cover crop. And it's like, it's kind of frustrating for them. But then when you start to listen, okay, so what happened? Then you start trying to analyze the situation. Then you're like, oh, maybe we didn't get enough biomass. Maybe we didn't get enough to do the work that we were expecting for it to do before it froze. We started experiencing our winter conditions. Then spring came, then you have to kill the crop, right? Or get it out so that you can have your cash crop in. So that kind of conversation really helps for you to really think deeply into what you are trying to design. And of course, when we were trying to talk about, okay, using the cover crop for trafficability, which is the current project. And so the question is, oh, how? Then you started having that conversation. Okay, maybe cover crop during the springtime, it will help, it will transpire and it will take up some of the moisture. Then your soil will dry faster, then you can get onto the field and move on it without much resistance. So it sounded great. Until we realized that, okay, that is not actually what is going to happen, because you have this tiny little cover crop during springtime and it's not going to do that magic. And when you look back, you realize that, okay, what is the recommendation for when cover crops should be sown? It's like around 15th September moving forward. And usually farmers are late to see that, because one, there could be no moisture to support that, or it's just the cash crop is taking longer for harvest to happen. And so when you seed your crop and the cover crop, and you don't have enough time, maybe 6 to 10 weeks for it to build up or have that enough biomass, and then it starts to freeze, we get frost, then it's dormant now, right?
Yeah.
Until spring. And it might not necessarily help you to do that work. But I realize there is more to having the crop to help you with trafficability, because at the end of the day, you get those cover crops, they protect your soil, but then it protects those channels that you created with your actual crops during the season. So what it would do is, with time, you end up getting water moving down, because during the spring, you want water to go down because there is very high relative humidity, which is stopping or impeding water evapotranspiration, right? So you want water to go down. And if it's able to go down, then during the drought period that we experience here, the water, there will be flow reversal. Then that water can support your crops. So it might not necessarily help you significantly during the springtime to traffic, or you have to still wait it out.
Right.
It will serve a purpose. And when you let this happen for a longer time, then you are restructuring your soil structure. Yeah.
Wow.
Afua, you talked about soil physics, or that soil structure as a house, and I like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So, and that's the physics of the soil. So, I mean, the chemistry, which is like the nutrients, etc., the biology, which is all the microbes, and physics, those are all related.
Yeah.
But why is the structure of the house so important?
Yeah, the house is very important.
I'm really excited about this analogy. I feel like it's really going to hit home with me. I'm hoping.
Yeah, it will. So when you have a house, you have multiple rooms, right?
Yeah.
So imagine that you have rooms of different sizes. Right? So
I'm with you.
depending on how the minerals, the clay, the silt, the sand, they come together and attach themselves with one another, it will create that kind of rooms that you are looking for. So in a soil, you want a wide range of those rooms, which we call pores. You need a wide range of that. So we have the macropores, the mesopores, the micropores, and there are two others below, but we will leave that one out.
Thank you.
So
For now, we'll come back to them.
When you have the macropores, what that helps you to do is it helps water to move through the soil. So water movement is enhanced under gravity going down. And then in the mesopores and part of the micropores, you are able to retain the moisture against gravity. So this is where your water holding capacity is very critical.
Okay.
So if you have the meso part of it, the lower end of the mesopores, and then the micro, you retain moisture. And then when you're in the micro, the same way. But then again, if you have these houses, then it helps you to know, how much bacteria do I have in my soil versus how much fungi do I have in my soil? And we know that having bacteria and fungi influences how nutrients are going to be available to the plant. So assuming you squish the bigger rooms, then you are going to impact the fungi. They are not going to have a place to play. And when you have too many of the tiny rooms, guess what? You're going to have lots of bacteria that you may not necessarily need. So that nutrient availability is going to be compromised. So the plants will not have access to that, right? So if you have, say, nitrogen fertilizer applied to your soil, you need some kind of bacteria to convert it from there to nitrate so that your plants can access that. So if you don't have enough of that, then maybe that will not happen. But if you have too much of that, then maybe it's going to cause other detrimental effect to your crops, right? You're going to have too much, and then when you convert to nitrate, well, guess what is happening? If the plants don't use it, you have your N2Os going, or you have leaching to groundwater, right? So depending on the houses you have and the number of it, and the rooms you have in the house, and the number of rooms you have in the house, and the sizes of the rooms that you have, it influences a lot of the dynamics in that soil.
It sounds like almost like a village or a town now. So we have multiple houses
Well, there you go.
with various rooms. So it takes a village. Is that a good analogy?
To grow a crop.
To grow a crop.
Exactly. Yeah, because that is actually what is happening in there, right?
Yeah.
The complexity of the soil is like village, lots of rooms and different dynamics there happening.
So if you drive heavy machinery all over the village, it squashes.
Yeah.
And are you a proponent of controlled traffic? So the controlled traffic is like the streets,
are you,
right?
Are you continuing this analogy?
Oh yeah,
I love it. How about municipal government? Is that what we want to get into?
The protesting and the underground villages.
Who's the reeve or the mayor?
But compaction is an issue in that it makes it more difficult for the soil to achieve these natural objectives.
Yeah, you're right. Because when compaction occurs, all other soil processes will be compromised. It's a huge, huge problem. So when you compact your soil, of course, you are closing in on those houses, on those rooms, right? So you are crashing them.
Yeah.
So you don't want that. And if you crash those macropores, that tells you already that your water is not good soil. Right? And then you may end up having the micro ones being dominant. And if the water ends up getting into the soil, it retains it. But here's the case, those larger pores or the macropores also help with air circulation, right? Air exchange between the atmosphere and the soil. So if that is crashed, then your soil is going to have a lot of carbon dioxide buildup because those bacteria are going to be very busy. The microbes in there are going to be very busy respiring. And if they don't have enough oxygen to take, then of course there will be too much of carbon dioxide in there. So your soil becomes anaerobic, right? Which makes it more acidic eventually. So you don't want that to happen. You don't want to crash the larger rooms in your house. You want to keep all of them open and active. Yeah.
Do you study compaction?
Yes, it's one of the key
so
areas.
So if we're going to, extend a message to farmers or anybody operating heavy equipment on the land, what is your message?
It boils down to what is the moisture content of the soil whenever you are using these equipment. It could be as tiny as the hooves of a cattle, and it will still compact if the soil does not have the right moisture.
Right. So even livestock can cause compaction.
Oh yeah. They do a lot of compaction, but we forget about them because it's not a machine.
So what is the moisture?
Yeah. So
message?
The moisture message is that we have to conduct what we call the lower plastic limit analysis so that we can determine at what level of moisture is it safe for the soil to be able to resist the weight that is coming from the machinery. So if we determine that, then you have the value. So if you have soil moisture sensors installed in your field and you are monitoring it, you'd be like, okay, it's at this level, so I can go. If it's below this level, that means I can go. And the most critical part of the soil that we have to consider is about the top 30 centimeters of the soil. Because if that part of the soil is having that moisture we are talking about, it provides protection for what is under it. So if that surface soil is not strong enough, then you are going to transfer all that weight from the machinery to the deeper layers. And that is where the problem is, that weight transfer to the deeper layers. Because if you are into, say, conventional farming, for instance, you go in there and then you can till the soil and it breaks things down. So you don't necessarily see what's happening down. But then all that weight is at that depth, right? The subsoil. And it's like you don't see it. So you don't necessarily know it's compromised until you want water to move and it's not moving ever. And it just stays there.
So that deeper area that gets compacted, then you lose your water infiltration.
Yeah.
And
so the water, the top part may still infiltrate, but then it will create like a water bath for you. It will just stay there.
Right.
Because it's going to take longer for the water to keep going down. And the other disadvantage is that when you have your crops in place, the root development, we expect it to go down. But then if that sublayer is compromised, then the roots will rather go laterally instead of going down. So they end up competing for moisture in that tiny little space with the others.
And nutrients.
And nutrients, exactly.
So the houses need to have basements.
Oh, yeah. You are so right. Yeah. So, yeah, the critical layer is very important. Like, at least the top 60 centimeters, you need to keep it open.
Right.
Yeah, you need to keep it open. You need to make sure things are moving in and out. so that water, air, nutrients, things can really flow. And even heat, right? Because how the heat transports or transfers from the surface to the deeper layers, if it's compacted, the thing is, so imagine you have walls, right? Two walls. And if the walls are very close together, it's easy to transfer heat from one side of the wall to the other because they are very close. That's conduction. But then if it's farther apart, because of the air space in between, it takes longer for the heat to move from that one wall to the other. So for you to have good soil heat, you need to make sure you have all those rooms still available. Otherwise, your soil just heats faster. Yeah, and when it heats faster, whatever moisture is left evaporates, poof, it's gone. Yeah, and then if there is drought condition, guess what? You're going to have a lot of drought problem. And if there's heat stress, the crops are not going to be happy.
How does a farm know they have compaction?
One of the simplest approach we can use is using what we call penetrometers. So there's like a probe that you can insert, and then it tells you the pressure, the resistance, right? So this simple tool is based on, of course, action and reaction, Newton's law, right? So you push it in, and a lot of people will be like, oh, well, that kind of, it's like it's based on the person's strength. But then really, if you start pushing it in, depending on the resistance you are getting, that is how much you can push it. So it's like when you try to insert it in a very open space, it will just go in. It doesn't matter your strength or whatever. It will just move right in because there isn't that much resistance. So when you have that much resistance, then it takes a lot of energy and effort to push it down. And then it records that for you. So in the top layer, we expect the penetration resistance to be about 3.5 megapascal. And then when you go to, say, below the 30 to about 60, we expect it to be around 4 to 5 megapascal. And with these, because when you place the seed in your soil and it's germinated, you want it to be able to come out. So within the top layer, and it's within the top layer. So you want that to happen. But then as they build stronger roots, they can be able to penetrate deeper. So we are a little bit not so conservative about what is happening down there. As long as you are within that 4 to 5 megapascal, then the crops are doing well. So that simple, tiny probe can do a lot of magic.
And would you have to probe every few feet? Or
depending on your activities, right? So if you are into conventional farming practice, because you have all these going, operations happening, and depending on the moisture, too, if you had gone to your field before the moisture was right, then definitely there's some smearing or you were doing some deformation somehow, right? Yeah. So if you suspect that you did something like that, you want to check, right? But then if there is no till, if you are doing no till, then naturally it's like you are not breaking it down. So of course, we are all under the effect of the atmosphere, right? It acts on us. So that weight and all of that dynamic is still happening. So when you have no till fill, depending on the kind of minerals you have present, you may want to check that as well. And especially when you have situations in Manitoba, for instance, where we experience a high intensity rainfall. It's like you have all the wetness, and in the springtime, then all of a sudden you have the drought period, and we pray for rains, and the rains come, we get significant portions of it, and it's just a lot in a short period. And when that happens, because the soil is dry, it causes deformation, and it breaks those tiny aggregates, and those houses that are on the surface, they begin to collapse, right? So those aggregates collapse, and then they fill those spaces that were supposed to be on the surface. And when that happens, then of course you create that hardness on the surface as well. That's what we call soil crusting, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Is there something that you see in your experience that farmers do kind of routinely that you'd like them to stop when it comes to soil?
Well, I would rather say I would like them to add.
Sure.
So that would be making sure the soil has cover all year round.
Is that right, eh?
Yeah, all year round, not just during the season. And I know some farmers do the off season one, the fall shoulder cover crop and all. But during the season, depending on the kind of crop you have, you may also have some parts of the field exposed, right? Depending on that's where intercropping becomes very critical.
Right.
So if we can do that and protect the surface, that would be great. Because there was, well, Glenley, I don't know if you know about Glenley.
Yeah.
You have these soils, it's heavy clay soil, and then it just rains over just a few hours, and you go back and the soil is so hard on the surface. So yes, we want water to be able to go down, but the water can only go down if it goes through the surface first.
Right.
So if we are able to protect the surface of the soil from the harshness of the rains that come, especially after a period of almost near drought condition, then that would be great.
Glenley is just south of Winnipeg for people who don't know, right in the Red River,
Yeah.
River Valley. But
And a research farm.
and a research
Yeah.
farm.
Yeah.
Would like crop stubble and residue count as cover, or do you need, like, there's this whole notion of the living root as far, but that's not always achievable in the prairies with our long winter and short fall. So I'm just wondering if leaving stubble and crop residue is enough.
Like as you drove down the driveway here, you saw canola stubble and volunteer canola
And
coming
some
up.
green living roots.
Yeah.
And some green living roots.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's how I refer to them too. Yeah.
Yeah. I would prefer the living plants being available because it depends on where you are. If you are in Saskatchewan or Alberta, maybe the stubbles may be useful because it traps the snow for you and then you're able to retain some moisture. But looking at the moisture condition that we have in Manitoba, it might not necessarily be useful because you want to get to your field as early as possible. So when you are trapping the snow, then it's like it's taking long for the dryness to happen. But then if you have the living root, the advantage is that one, it will keep growing during that time and then it will transpire. So you are removing the moisture and also helping to continue to create those channels deep down. But then the other thing is if you have some of the leaves, it also covers the surface as well. And then because it's active, you have all those biological stuff happening. You create those soils around the root mesh. It forms those aggregates around there. So it holds the soil together and makes it more stable. Right. So yes, the stubbles may be great when you want to leave some, build your organic matter and all. But then you have to understand the climate you are dealing with to see if it's going to be useful or not. But I would say that I would rather go with the living plants. And it's not just the water aspect, but then you are also promoting those activities that you need in your soil, right? Increase the soil carbon, and it helps to bind things together as well, because those are very, very important.
I think this is one of those cases, Afua, where have farmers involved in that research.
Yeah.
Because there's this notion that this regenerative agriculture movement is not really driven by agriculture. It's driven by people outside who don't really understand the complexities of farming, especially on the prairies. But if we could have these conversations with farmers and come up with solutions that work in Manitoba, and the Red River Valley solution, like you said, will be different from the drier plains of Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Yeah. I'm really interested in that, like that relationship between extension and kind of empowerment and participation. Like because I agree with you. Like I've seen some of the on-farm research programs that Manitoba Pulse Growers and other commodity groups have initiated, and that gets a lot of favorable attention from farmers if they're brought in at that early stage and they can see the results for themselves and they can participate in it from the get-go. Like that's such an effective way to drive home the value of research. And so do you have a sense of like, so you talked about that being successful at the university level. Is there a sense of like, can you scale it up? Could you do more of that kind of farmer participation? And how does that look?
I think we don't have a choice.
Yeah.
That is how we should approach things. Because I always say farmers know the soil, they know the land, they till the land, they really understand, they can't even talk to the land. So they know what they are dealing with right there and then. So yes, I may have had some farming background and I've studied for a long time to understand what goes on. But I think that collaboration is really key to our advancement in the agricultural industry. We need to continue to do that. And I'm really glad that it's a required thing for us to do. Sometimes scientists are like, yeah, I don't want to talk to people. Yeah. Especially if you're an engineer, you're like, I don't want to talk to people. But no, I'm happy that we are forced to do that, bringing agronomists, bringing the farmers, bringing all these people right from the get-go to have that conversation.
And it's good for farmers too, right? I mean, I mean, I can see it being valuable for researchers 100%. But, if I think of it, a good analogy would be like, say I'm with a group of people and I haven't been talking for like 10, 15 minutes, and you just kind of, you sink into yourself a little bit. You kind of start analyzing this group from a distance, and you think, I don't want to be here. I don't want to participate, blah, 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 until all of a sudden you're forced to participate, and then you're brought into a discussion, and then you're in it, and then it's different. Everything just changes, right? And I can see that being the same for research, where if you're not involved, putting my farmer hat on, if I'm not involved and I can take that bird's eye view, I can think whatever I want from it. Of it, I'm like, oh, that's useless. I'll never see a return on investment, or I'll never understand it until I'm forced to participate. And then all of a sudden, I'm in this, and I could see that being just a night and day difference. Yeah. No, that's a very,
I mean, when I started my position, of course, you have all these wild ideas.
Of course.
And then I was very fortunate to be part of the canola research camp, the first group cohort. And it really opened my eyes and changed my perspective. It's like, oh, okay, I need to reimagine things. And that really helped shape what I'm doing right now. So yes, I really love basic science research, because we need that information for us to give to those who want to do applied research, to do that effectively, right?
Yeah.
I know there is always that contention, applied versus basic science. They are all very, very important. We cannot do without the other, especially in this time that we are in. I mean, we may have had some science going on maybe 50 years ago, 80 years ago. The times have changed. The climate, now we have longer summers, and it keeps going. So if we were relying on information from 60, 80 years ago, no, we need to update that science to make sure it's relevant now. So yes, we may have funding agencies sponsoring particular, having certain priorities, but we cannot drop the basic science. We need to bring them together, even if you are doing on farm or whole farm, whatever we want to call it. We need to make sure that the science, the basic science, is there to be able to explain all the phenomena that we're going to see when we step into that big field.
So before we talk for a long time, well, we could, and we're not going to, about funding of science, because that's a whole other topic. We need to talk about food, though.
We do need to talk about food.
Okay.
I do want to, one quick thing. There's always one more quick thing, but yeah, it's going to be super fast, I swear. So when we talk about moisture, so this year is interesting, right? Because it's been quite a moist year in Manitoba, and we had late season moisture this year. So yeah, I guess, how does science kind of account for these? I don't even know if I don't know if you can call them outlier seasons anymore, because it seems like every season is. So when
there's
we talk
no normal.
That's right. So there's no normal. So when we start making plans, like soil plans, or surrounding your soil as a farmer, cover cropping, all this stuff, taking into account moisture or lack thereof, and you're just coming off of a year like this. How do you? It's hard to think about, right? Like, it's a challenging thing to.
It is, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
It is very frustrating, because of course you have your plans. You imagine how the season is going to go, and then the rains won't stop. It just keeps coming, and you keep waiting. And maybe you may have planned maybe late April, then frost. Even May, sometimes June. So it's like things just you can't deal. That one you cannot. It's the weather, it's the climate. You can't change unless we can go up there and switch something off. Then that would be great. But what we can control is where we are, right here on the earth, standing on the soil, right? So the practices that we put in place to help regulate that moisture becomes very, very important.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Regulating the moisture. Yeah. I like that. You wanted to talk about food. You hungry?
Well,
Are you hungry,
yeah.
Jay?
Is it lunchtime?
It's getting there. Yeah.
Afua, we talked a little bit about jollof rice, which I'm looking forward to you making some of that for me, which is like the Ghanaian, I don't know whether it's the national dish, but it's a well-known dish from Ghana.
It is.
But that's not your favorite food. Your favorite food or your comfort food is something different. Can you tell us what that is?
That would be bangkun with either okra sauce or just pepper with tomatoes ground together sauce.
And
whatever sauce.
Banku?
Yeah, it's made with corn.
So it's
You
like
make corn
like
dough.
grits.
Like a sweet corn,
No,
Okay.
not sweet. So you ferment it and then you mill it and then you ferment first and then you mill and then you ferment again. Very fermented, yeah.
What does it taste like?
Very fermented.
Yeah.
It's sour.
Like a kimchi,
sauerkraut?
like
Very sour, yeah. Very sour.
And then you put okra relish.
And then when you make like porridge but hard ones, so like you make balls out of it, and then you use that with the okra sauce with meat, whatever you want.
Like
to
a
put in
meatball,
there.
like a falafel sort of thing, like a ball. And then would you fry that or just eat it like a ball?
Just as it is, like you stir it up, and
Yeah.
then it's a paste, right? You make a paste out of it, and then it's like when you are dealing with flour, kneading a flour or something, so you get that kind of texture. And then, of course, that's the main dish. And then you add your sauce to it. Yeah. And then, you dip it in the sauce. I should make that one.
Yeah, you should.
I feel like,
Yeah.
when you come back,
Yeah.
when you come back for the next episode, then we'll
It's very sour. If you like sour cream or anything sour, it should be. Or cheesecake, like it has that kind of taste.
Oh, now I want to
behind
try it.
Yeah.
I wanna try it.
Cheesecake. Fermented cheesecake. Well, I guess, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I like my cheesecake very sour. I don't like it sweet. So.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to talk about Canadian food grains bank. I thought that's what you were going to go to.
Oh, yeah, we could do that too. You're on the board of the Canadian Food Grains Bank.
Yes, I
So
am.
is that how you would like to end this conversation, or do you want to talk about? Is there like one last thing that you wanted to?
Well, you never know where this will end. So.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So that's right.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we didn't ask you about
Well,
that you wanted to say?
I do want to ask what you grew in Ghana when you were middle school and surrounded by farming. What was being grown?
Mainly corn.
Okay.
Mainly corn. And then you have like cassava or yam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then little vegetable.
Nice.
Yeah.
By
Nice.
corn, you mean maize or corn?
Maize,
Yeah.
Interesting. So a Mexican crop was a staple in
Yeah,
Ghana.
it's the staple. Yeah. So you use corn is like kenke, bangkun, everything. Like you can eat corn meal every time, like for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner. It's everywhere. I guess that's why I like it as a comfort food because I ate it for so long. And that's what my uncles were growing mostly. So we had lots of that available. So yeah.
So and then was that sold like in local farmers markets? Was that how that market worked? Yeah.
So we had in the town we had a weekly market stuff going on there. So every Thursday we will have all these traders coming in from all over the place. Some from different countries, actually neighboring countries.
Yeah.
They will come there and then buy the produce. Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Well, I could ask that question again. Was there one last thing that you wanted to say during this podcast?
I interrupted you. Sorry, Jay.
when you woke up in the night and were thinking about the podcast, was there something that you really wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to say yet?
Well, I feel strongly about us working with farmers and not just researchers, but all of us as Canadians. And when we are throwing things at them, expecting them to step up and do volunteer all the time, we have to ask ourselves how we supporting farmers to be able to protect or make sure the soil that they are cultivating is healthy all the time to support the other ecosystem services. Because it's not just the yield that we have to focus on. And frankly, The 7% of the Canadian land mass that is for agricultural production is the best part of our land. And that 7%, interestingly about agricultural soils, you have good structures, you have good house.
Good houses, yeah.
You have very good structure, right? And those structures are very important for all the other ecosystem services. So if we have that 7% compromised, then we are all doomed. So we need to support farmers. Yes, we want to get that aspect of the ecosystem service, which is food, but there is more to the soil than food. So how do we support farmers to be able to keep these soils healthy without throwing at them and expecting them to do all the work and volunteer all the time? What can we do as citizens to support farmers in that quest for our own good? Like the new the report that came out in June on soil health, the critical ground. It's the soil being healthy is us being healthy.
Us being healthy.
Yeah. Soil being healthy is us being healthy. Yeah. That's a strong finish for sure.
Nana.
Oh, you caught that. Yes.
This phrase that your mom said, and I know you're thinking about your mom today, who you are and whose child you are. So she wanted you to always think about who you are, whose child you are, and where you are going.
Yeah.
Was that her, or was that part of Ghanaian culture?
It was her.
It was her.
Yeah. And one interesting thing, like my mom didn't even get middle school certificates, right? But she always vowed to herself and to us that she knew the importance of education. So she'd be like, I couldn't do this. She was very smart. But then, of course, the system around that time did not support her in that regard. But then she's like, I couldn't do this, but you want to be an engineer. I'll make sure whatever I can, you will be. And this support from her that I got, I'll tell you the story behind it. So when I was in junior high school first year, about early part of it, there is this lady in the first village 1 that I talked about. She was the pastor's wife of our church, and they had a lot of influence on our family because of what we were going through. They were support, food, and all of that. So one day she visited us, and my mom and her, they were standing somewhere close to the house, and I was sitting on the staircase, and I could hear them having that conversation. So the lady told my mom, well, she is good with her hands. I could style hair, I could sew clothes. So maybe she should drop out of school and start doing something to support the family's income. And my mom was furious. She was like, kept her cool until she left. Then she came, met me sitting on the staircase. Then she said, Nana, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I want to be an engineer. And then she looked straight in my eyes. You will be engineer. Do you hear me? You will be an engineer. As if she knew what that was. But she knew.
I love it.
Yeah. Since that day, I knew I had to be an engineer.
Wow, that's
and
powerful.
Whatever the circumstance or whatever life was throwing at us, no, I did not waver. I knew she was behind. And as she would say, it's not where you are, it's what you are. Remember whose child you are and where you are going. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
What a great conversation.
It was an honor for sure.
Thank you too, and thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Our pleasure. Or my pleasure. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
He seems on the fence about it. No,
I like that line. Remember who you are, whose child you are, and where you're going.
That is a good one. So that was a great conversation.
It was.
Yeah.
It's one of those conversations where, 30 minutes in, we realized, well, we're not even close to what we really wanted to talk about. But it was so engaging and fun. I didn't really want to force the soil conversation, even great though it was.
No. Soil's a very fascinating topic. We've talked about it a couple of times already on this podcast, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot more. But, it's just such a complex thing, and it's so really starting to kind of get
What's happening? Oh,
He's not going to be able to kill it. We're attempting to kill a fly here in the studio. Did you catch it?
no.
Apparently you can hear the fly in the mic.
So yeah, if you can hear a fly, it is really a fly. It's not my nose hairs whistling.
It's a ventriloquism, right? It's just like,
It's not my speech impediment.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the complexities of soil, it's just like you have people who have PhDs talking about it here, right? And like they studied this for a long time.
Yeah.
I work with it, and you work with it too. Your work, and like, yeah, like I'm really excited. I hope after a number of episodes, I'm actually going to start learning about it, right?
Yeah.
Because it is complex.
Well, and I just like the house analogy. I hadn't heard that before.
Good.
But you can imagine a whole village, which is your soil, and then you drive over it with a bulldozer or a steamroller.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you realize, oh yeah, no, it maybe isn't going to be as livable or as productive as it used to be when it's all compacted like that.
Yeah, like I think those analogies, are, at least to me, and I'm guessing for a few other people, are really valuable. Like it really drives it home, and the basement, like all that stuff, it starts to make sense. Starts to really drive home. I can come back to soil if you want to have anything more about soil.
Well, no, I think you should conclude soil. I just want to say Afua's mom's line one more time, just because I love it, and I want to close with that.
Yeah.
So as you heard in the podcast, Afua's mom would tell her, remember who you are, whose child you are, and where you're going. And I think that's a really great philosophy for life. I mean, we carry the words and the experiences of our ancestors and our communities with us. And if we can remember that and build from that in a positive way, it's a great message.
The if it was like resolve and like clarity of vision from a young age is quite inspiring as well. Kind of anchored on that, right? Just it was so clear her path, and she stuck with it, and with passion. I mean, you can still tell that she's.
And we're so lucky to have her in Western Canada.
Absolutely. I'm really interested in that relationship between that extension and empowerment and participation. I think that's a really. I just, for some reason, it just really struck.
Like having farmers participate in the research.
Yeah. Like, and I know it's been talked about before, and I've been a part of those conversations in the past too. But it really drove home. It really kind of sunk in during this conversation. Be like, yeah, that is, when we talk about extension and effective approaches to extension, I think a key part of that is getting who you're extending to participate in some way, like, and kind of answering that question, checking that box, right? I think that's important.
And that's what keeps us interested in continuing with this podcast. So on that note,
yes,
this has been the Extensionists. I'm Jay Whetter.
And I'm Toban Dyck.
Until next time. This has been a Burr Forest Group production. We also want to thank the people you don't see.
We're here, we're chatting away with our guests, but there's tons of people who work behind the scenes to make this podcast happen.
Ryan Sanchi is our director.
Ashley Robinson is the coordinator.
And Abby Wall is our producer and editor.